My mother-in-law and me. You know, Libby said to me, we're a lot alike, the Italians and the Jews. We fight, we yell, we eat. We fight, we eat, we fight. We fight, but we still love each other, you know? That was how I intended to end the eulogy about my mother-in-law. I just wasn't sure how the rest of it would go down, so I was nervous, squirming in my seat, sweating up a storm. Libby was both deliberately and inadvertently very, very funny. She could be razor sharp and deeply profane. While personal eulogies are no longer allowed in Catholic churches, I was hoping the conservative branch of Judaism would have a sense of humor. Besides, I reasoned, once I was up there, no one could stop me. I intended to begin with the first time we met. Her son Yash, not yet my husband, and I were coming home from Manhattan to Long Island for a Seder, which would have been my first Seder, except we were late. Very late. As in, we missed the entire ceremony and everyone was now in the downstairs living room watching a movie. Except Libby. She was seated on one of two red velvet covered chairs that resembled matching thrones. Yash introduced us and left me alone on the couch to go and rummage for leftovers. Libby gave me the once-over, and the very first thing she said to me was, "So, why do you date my son? What is it about my son you like? And out of all the men in the world, why would you want to date my son?" I paused. Out of all the things I could imagine she would ask me, this was not one of them. "I guess I date your son because he has a great body." "Yeah, a great body. That's why I date your son," I replied. She said, "Oh, is that what young people go for nowadays?" I answered, "I think that's what young people have always gone for, actually." Libby tilted her chin down so that her thin, black-rimmed glasses slid down her nose and her dark eyes peered at me as she said, "Oh." Then she paused and shouted, "Yash, get your girlfriend some food." After that, we were thick as thieves. So, she was very unhappy a few years after we married to find out there was trouble between Yash and me. "Please don't divorce my son. Whatever you do, don't divorce my son, please, please, please," she begged. "Okay," I said into the phone, alarmed. My reasons for saying okay were guilt, panic, and to stop her from crying. I knew I was lying, but I wanted to take away the pain in her voice, the pain she was feeling. The shakiness of my marriage between me and Yash was a disappointment to her because she loved me and I was part of her family. But change happens. 2 years later, we were separated and Libby was dead. I didn't talk to her specifically about Yash. She already knew his shortcomings perfectly well and a few times listed them in public at family dinners until at the very end of her rant, she would blame herself, saying that his feelings were not his fault because she never had any self-esteem and therefore could not instill it in her son. Then she would sob. Startled the first time it happened and angry the next, I spoke with Yash privately, urging him to tell his mother to cease the public displays, and if she had anything to say to him, she should do so in private. But to me, she was always encouraging, personable, even deferential. After she was widowed, she became increasingly housebound, and her phone was her weapon of choice. Though she did not drive, this was not the reason for the narrowing of her world. Her home was where she felt safe, where all her stuff was, and the place she wanted to die. She had Meals on Wheels delivered, as well as newspapers and library books. Her neighbors looked in on her regularly. All of her children and grandchildren visited often. There was no reason for her to leave. Because of her phone, she never lost contact with the outside world. Sometimes when I got home from work, there could be 8 or 9 or 10 messages on the answering machine. When we talked, the calls could last at least an hour or more. She always asked, "What was new? What had I done today? What did I see? Where did I go? What did I do?" She seemed to live vicariously through her phone line. She read me articles and told me all sorts of Jewish jokes that she either found or her eldest son sent to her. And sometimes she would sing old songs from the 40s and the 50s, and fortunately, I could sing most of them along with her. Show tunes, too. It did not hurt that I knew all the words to Brush Up Your Shakespeare from Kiss Me, Kate. She saved most of her venom for President George W. Bush, though, calling him the worst name she could call anyone. "He's an anti-Semite, Lisa, just like his father. That..." But mostly, we talked about family and food. She talked and asked about my sister's mother and my estranged father, the latter whom she referred to as that jerk or that deadbeat. She talked about her grandchildren and how much she missed her husband. She knew I was from New England, so we talked about my love of Cape Cod and how much she loved lobster with a lot of butter, even though she wasn't supposed to. When she asked what I was cooking and I said sauce or steak, she always said, "That sounds nice." She'd confess to me when she'd eat Chinese food on paper plates and feel guilty about it, but that didn't stop her from doing it from time to time. Mothers-in-law get a bum rap, rather like wicked stepmothers. They are traditionally meddlers, harridans, and they were the staple of the Borscht Belt comedians. That was not the case with Libby. After being married and unmarried to Yash and knowing his siblings, I believe that in many ways she treated me better than her own children. Like grandparents who are better to their grandchildren than they were to their own children, so was my mother-in-law better to me. I don't believe she loved me more. Love had nothing to do with it. Rather, it was the distance, not directly responsible for my well-being, for my being successful in the world, that made it easy for her to be my ally. When she died, I was the one to tell Yash. I was at his apartment that night, around 8 o'clock, visiting the cats, and his older brother, Alan, called and told me. I burst into tears, then composed myself, grabbed a coat, walked down to the restaurant where he worked, told his manager because it was the height of the dinner hour, and told Yash. He seemed shocked, unable to take it in. We went home and I stayed with him. No one asked me if I would be going to the funeral. It was assumed I would be there. In fact, it never occurred to me to not go. I wanted to go for both Yash and Libby. Once arrangements were being made, I asked Yash if anyone other than the rabbi would be speaking. Her oldest son would say something, he said. No one else? I asked. No friends, no other relations? No one is going to talk about her sense of humor? I wanted to speak. I wanted to represent what I knew and how I felt about Libby. After all, I loved her. Alan said, "Of course, Lisa can speak." So I stood up in my gray Calvin Klein sleeveless sheath. As I write this line, I think of the play Love, Loss, and What I Wore, and how the Ephron sisters perfectly nails the particular way the memory of women and their clothes works. And I told stories about Libby. People laughed, cried, laughed some more, and afterwards strangers grabbed me and said, "That is exactly how she was, you know." I do know. Had she been there, Libby would have laughed the loudest.